5, evaluating performance using outcomes and indicators. Learning objective, or we will understand how to use data from the Carter questions to identify performance and accountability. We will learn to identify how to calculate success for the CSBG network in 2 ways. We will learn that what baseball teaches us about measuring performance. We will identify industry standards for performance. We'll identify measuring tools and processes, and we'll practice matching outcomes and indicators to management tools. If you will, with me, turn to page 62 in your participant manual. We're going to talk about Carter's questions over here in this poster, original Carter question. We're going to specifically talk about question 1, 3, and 6. How many clients are we serving? What service do you give them? And what happens to the client as a result of the service? And then would be the next addition to our logic model in calculating measuring performance. Turn to page 63, establishing targets and measurements, measuring performance. Okay. There are 5 steps used to identify expected performance, and the 6th step to determine actual performance. Could somebody read the first 3 for me? Identify outcomes. Service.
Identify the outcomes. This is a qualitative statement about what is going to be achieved with no numbers. Identify the service, activity, intervention, or output that is expected to produce the outcome. Identify the number of people receiving the service. Identify a time frame as a part of the description of the service.
Okay. Identifying the outcomes or indicators. This is a qualitative statement where the number of clients or units that are expected to achieve the outcome is added to the general outcome statement. Estimated performance by calculating the relationship between the numbers receiving the service and the number achieving the outcome. Dividing that number expected to achieve the outcome placed in the numerator of a fraction you are creating by the number expected to receive the service placed in the denominator of the fraction. You get a percentage. This is calculating yield, a percentage, well, which is the projected success rate. Somebody read the next 3 for me, please.
These steps occur prior to delivery of the service and are used to target or estimate your performance for the service. The final step occurs after the service when you know what happened to determine your actual success rate. Actual performance is calculated after delivery of the service using the same process as above, but replacing the projected or targeted numbers with the actual numbers in both the numerator and the denominator. Okay.
So from that, we're going to be establishing target and measuring performance as an example. If you turn to 64, estimating performance. A family self-sufficiency program has enrolled 20 families as the denominator who will receive case management service over the next 6 months. It is estimated or projected that 7 of the families, the numerator, will increase their household income as a result of the various activities coordinated by the case managers. Your outcome is to increase household income, service activity, case management, case managed, family self-sufficiency program, number of people served under 20, and family for 6 months. And let me show you this. We estimate performance 7 families out of 20 equal 35%. That's the estimated performance. Actually, 5 families actually completed or enrolled. They give you 25%, and that's your actual performance. When measuring actual performance of the people who receive the program, this is followed up that said 5 families of the actual performance. Then you have what we call a reduced denominator, the measuring actual performance with a reduced denominator. And that if you're managing a program using results-oriented practices, you will want to know how many individuals you will need to serve to achieve certain goals. Let's assume that some individual who enrolled would not complete the program. For example, if the 20 families enrolled in the case management, you find at the end of the program, 15 families completed all the requirements. So do you use the 20 as a denominator or base, or do you use the 15? You use the 15 because 5 did not complete it, so you got to reduce the denominator. Now we saw that the actual performance rate of this program is 25%, 5 out of 20. If the CAA only counts those completing the program, 15, it inflates the success rate from 25% to 33%. So 5 families completed 33%. This is actual. With a reduced denominator. Which one is better?
The actual performance.
Neither. Because you're measuring 2 things. You're measuring how many completed and how many actually completed, the denominator. And why would you need to know that?
So you'll know what your success rate is for the ones you based on what you estimated and how close you got to it.
Right. And also you want to know how much money that you expend when you create your estimation. So you need to know how much that you're spending and how much you're actually getting from your expenditure and money, and it helps you with your future planning. So we didn't finish our results, but on our logic model, we're going to continue the construction. And we're going to put that down here. Okay. So next, we're going to do an activity called Let's Talk Baseball. Okay, use the use of baseball performance statistic in Roma, in this Roma course, is simple means of communicating the concept of performance and setting realistic performance standards. How many know what batting 1,000 means?
Did you hit every time?
You hit it every time. Batting perfectly. And that is that realistic?
No.
No, it's not.
Nobody does.
So has anybody ever hit 1,000? Batting 1,000?
No.
No, they have not.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Not one time. Wow.
Bat
Okay.
first and hit first.
I'm gonna pass out some cards. And these are baseball players. Take one. Okay. We got a couple more. Yeah.
See, now you don't get some.
Go look at the bottom of the card. Look at the bottom of the card and look at the batting averages. Yeah, they should be at the bottom. Okay.
Oh, yes, sir.
Okay. Everybody found the number? All right. Okay. Could you call out, what the numbers on the batting average?
223.
223.
Are we looking at career or average?
Career average.
Career, career total.
Career total, yeah.
Okay.
250. 250.
259.
259.
308.
237.
Oh, my
Okay.
goodness. 278
278.
and 283.
283.
Did you get my 308?
308.
And 288.
288.
321.
321.
Wow, who's that?
253.
The card she took from me.
253.
And 248.
248.
Who was it again?
Right.
Tom.
304.
304. 353.
Who that?
And 346.
Yeah, who are these
346.
He has a serious bad
people? Not you wonder.
Okay. In baseball,
Sergio Santos.
and you see most of those baseball cards, a lot of those guys are Hall of Famers. The ones that are Hall of Famers are probably batting in the 300. This is considered excellent, all pro, all Hall of Fame batting numbers. And
They're nowhere close to 1,000, are they?
yeah, and if you're batting between 288 and 253, this is average. And if you're batting below 253 to 250 and 248, 223, you won't make the Hall of Fame unless you're a pitcher. You might be over here somewhere. So, but if you're batting, say for instance, you're batting in the middle here. If you're batting 321 out of 1,000 at bats, that's 32.1%. And that's a Hall of Fame number. If you're batting 278 over 1,000, that's 27.8%. Because you're averaging, you're still playing, you're in the league. But if you're batting, say for instance 237 over 1,000, you're batting 23.7%, and probably won't be playing long in the big league. But what this teaches us, though, when we look at community action, and everybody wants to know what we're doing, our averages. I mean, how many people we serve. So if we just said, if 10 out of 20 succeeded, that's 50%. But we don't. But for most industry, they say, well, that's not good. But actually, with baseball, tell us that is good. It's 321%. So I get those cards later.
Oh, you want
Are you sure?
Yes, I do. If you look on page 68, a picture of Yogi Berra, and the numerator for Yogi Berra is 179 hits, and the denominator was 584 at bats. He batted at .07 batting average. Yogi Berra successfully hit the ball and got on base 30.7% of the time in baseball. His batting average is over 300%, over batting .300, 300%. Great as a superstar. Between 299 and 250 is achieved the majority of the players. Less than 2.49 to 24.9% is least successful baseball player. Yogi Berra was a superstar, but unless we start telling folks that 30% was highly successful, then you might thought of him as a fake. Baseball been collecting these statistics before 1876, and they started with pencil and paper. In over 137 years, baseball has developed standards of performance. Like I said, hitting 300 is exceeding. What did baseball teach us, or what we need to do? We clearly define the performance indicators, hits, getting on base, related to outcomes, winning games. Observed performance and kept records. They analyzed all the data, developed benchmarks of excellence based on analysis, and they publicized what they've learned so the public knows that 30% is excellent in baseball. See, well, that's what we need to do. We need to publicize what we do so they know that what we're doing is excellent. They've tried everything. To define excellence. They had many attempts to improve the performance during that time. They manufactured better bats, designing and building ballparks to favor hitters, changing manufacturers of baseball to make it more lively, changed the height of the pitching mound. None of these increased performance of the average baseball player. Still has hit above 300%. Okay. We're going to look at, turn to page 70. And look at the activity success measures of industry. I just want to ask a few of these. Executive management recruitment, blank percent placement rate. What would y'all say that would be?
52.
20%. New magazines, blank percentage survive over 12 months.
3.
3.3%. Movies, blank and blank or blank percentage make a profit. 1 in 6 or 16% make a profit. Let's go down to record, music, and recording. Blank percent make a profit.
15?
5%.
Wow.
Yeah. What we, community action, we must establish our own standards of performance and communicate these standards of performance to elected officials, to government, public and private funders, the general public and media, and the staff of CAAs, and the CSBG eligible entities.
What was the Broadway stat?
Broadway stat.
I like Broadway.
Broadway, 1 in 7 or 14.3% make a profit. Okay, performing targets MPIs. Page 71. Performing targeting for MPIs. Another way to calculate success. We had talked about that, I think, in Module 3. It's based on different formulas that one will the one we previously learned. Performance in this case refers back to one of the key provisions of GPRA. Agency must be able to accurately identify performance goals or targets prior to beginning service. when reporting on the NPI, CAAs must ask to project the numbers to be served and the number of to achieve the outcomes in the 3 areas: employment, economic and asset enhancement, and utilization and child and family development. The calculation does not use the number of those receiving services. If in this performance calculation, you will be comparing the numbers of targeted or projected outcomes with which the denominator with the actual number will achieve the outcome, which become the numerator. Okay. On page 72 when you look, another dimension of performance. In the example used previously, we projected 7 out of 20 families receiving case management service will achieve the expected outcome. This number projected our target, and the number that the name becomes the denominator. Other factors we are creating to establish this performance rate. When the program was complete, we found 5 families actually achieved the outcome. The actual numbers became the numerator of the fraction. Your ability to successfully project your performance for this project is really 71%. Because 5 families increased their household income by 10%. That's actual. The numerator. The denominator, 7 families increased household income by 10%, the target. So that gives you a success rate of 71%. It's how you actually break down our percentages. It's 71%, you would compare it to some of the national baseball, some of the other industries. Yeah. Pretty good. So we need to better our story and put it in a framework where folks can understand, but also put it in a framework for those funders and staff and other community action agencies, as we said before. Okay, establishing measuring tools. That's on page 73. Establishing measure tool and process. When you are considering the outcomes you expect to achieve, you need to consider how you will measure the outcome of the accomplishment of the outcome. Excuse me. When we consider the identification of the indicator in the last module, we provided examples that included thinking about how you would measure the indicator. For example, improved grades, a report card. Now we need to look at more closely at the measurement tool process that you would use as evidence. Here are a few shortcuts to help you use that. Minimize use of soft outcomes. Use the measuring tools to capture outcomes. Use pre-existing measuring tools before creating one. And research other organizations who have outcome framework before creating your own. For example, using a measuring tool to capture outcome. That's intake, your assessment instrument, pre and post test, customer client satisfaction survey, follow-up survey, observation surveys, scales, e.g. functioning scales, self-sufficiency. Or use pre-existing measures, tools before creating one. There's tools out there for education programs such as adult ed, English as a second language, ESL classes, and so forth. And then there's organization that's out there. They may have outcome framework before creating your own. American Red Cross, Big Brothers and Sisters, Boys and Girls Club, Girl Scouts, Salvation Army, United Way, YMCA, YWCA. Okay. Identifying evidence. Drucker. We talked a lot about him in the car. A Drucker reminds us that we look at qualitative and quantitative data, need data. We would identify both qualitative and quantitative data. I'm on 75. process of achievement can be appraised in qualitative and quantitative data terms. These two types of measurement are interwoven. They shed light on one another, and they both are necessary to illuminate in what ways, to what extent lives are being changed. Qualitative data, someone, could you read qualitative for me on page 75? Y'all see it? Y'all follow?
Qualitative measures
Yeah, qualitative measures, thank you.
addresses the depth and breadth of change within a particular context. Qualitative results can be in the realm of the intangible, such as instilling hope in a patient battling cancer. Qualitative data, although sometimes more subjective and difficult to grasp, are just as real, just as important, and can be gathered just as systematically as the quantitative.
Okay. Quantitative measures use defined standards. Quantitative appraisal offer valid, hard data. Quantitative measures are essential for assessing whether resources are properly concentrated for results, whether the process is being made, whether lives and community are changing for the better. We must have a clear idea about what we will measure. The outcome indicators are also how we will measure the results, about the evidence we will use to support our claims of success. Think about the question. How do you know? What proof can you provide that outcomes have been achieved? What documents do you have? All right, then we move over to what are measuring tools and the process. Turn to page 78, please.
78.
78 or
76, I'm sorry. They're gone. My glasses are not good. I'm going to buy some new glasses. Still can't see. Okay. Considering the needs, outcomes, strategies, and outcome indicators you identified previously, what measurement tools would you use to document your results? What would you use? What are some of the documents you would use to let me give you some examples first. Tools of measurements. Could be a bank account, a copy of diploma or certificate, employee records, escrow account. Those are tools of measurement. A data source would be agency data bank, case notes, computer spreadsheet, individual case records, and the frequency of the data would be daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, biannually, annually, upon incident. So those are some of our measuring tools. Anybody want to add any more?
Well, for ours, I guess we would use their license.
Yeah, driver's license.
Their permit.
you got that permit first.
Let's go. What's our, they already said the measurement too. Driver's license.
The permit too.
What?
Before they get to
And they gotta get that before they get to driving.
What if someone's was in a job training course? How would you know they were doing that? If the program had a training program, what would be the data source that you would receive? Sign-in sheet. Yeah.
Or like, I guess if you have somebody in class, you need their school schedule.
Could be, yeah. And then frequency. Attendance sheet. Well, how often would you get the attendance sheet?
Well, it depends on what the schedule is, I guess. Maybe
Weekly, monthly, quarterly. Is there more y'all wanna add to that list? All right then. We're gonna do our key summary. Measuring performance and establishing standards. This module provided the definition of success using outcomes and indicators. Introduced concepts of performance, targets, and actual accomplishments. Made the case that performance in human services should be made realistic, similar to that found in private sector industry standards typified by the baseball cards, based on actual data from agencies. Provide the formula for identifying agencies' ability to target or project their success, which is used in some elements of the NPI. Identify measuring tools and process. Okay, that's it for 5.
Urban achievement of results using scales and matrices. The learning objectives are: participants learn the process of creating an outcome scale. Participants understand how outcome scales can be used to measure incremental change and movement towards self-sufficiency. Participants are able to combine outcome scales to form an outcome matrix to capture multiple interventions, needs, programs, and outcomes. Participants will also understand the use of the outcome matrix and can analyze an outcome matrix. Okay. Does this scale looks familiar to anyone, or can anyone tell me? Yes. Can you see? It's a gas gauge. Do you let's see. In this scale, we measure incremental change in the amount of gas available to power the automobile. Why do you keep an eye on your gas gauge? Because it's always changing, and you don't want to run out on the side of the road. While all automobiles have some kind of gas gauge indicating a range from full to empty, the meaning of benchmarks on the gauge will vary from car to car. One difference between cars is the size of the tank. F may equal 12 gallons or 25 gallons. Another difference between cars is the rate of use of the gas, so movement from full to empty will differ, or miles per gallon. The rate of use will also differ depending on what type of driving you are doing, long distance on the interstate or local stop and go in a crowded urban area. These are all variables that need to be considered when identifying the well-being of your fuel situation. When do you stop for gas? At full? No. What about at 3/4 of the tank?
Sometimes.
Sometimes? What about half a tank? A fourth of a tank?
Definitely.
What about E?
When the light runs off.
You don't need, you in bad shape.
When that light comes on, I start looking around.
You know you have 40 miles.
Okay. Just like the gas gauge, community actions use a scale to determine when to intervene. So if you wait too long, like if we wait to E, it may be more costly for us. You may have, have to call a tow truck or somebody to come bring you some gas, and it may be more costly. Your decisions are based on circumstances. Let's say you are on the interstate and you see a sign that says, last gas station for 300 miles. Would you stop for gas?
Yes.
Even if you have a half a tank, would you?
Yes.
Probably. But if you're in a city where the gas station is every few blocks, you may wait closer to E before you stop.
Or you find a cheaper price.
Did you see it went up overnight?
Yeah, it did go up.
Not a little bit either.
15 to 20 cents.
This is the MATF scale. It's a scale that's often used in community action. As I mentioned earlier, we use it to determine when should we proceed with an intervention or when the client is in their most, crisis need or is there, thank you. If everyone could turn to page 79, please. Do you guys agree that the terminology used in the MATF scale correlates with the gas gauge?
Yeah.
Yes, it does. And and we also should notice the difference between the sense of well-being when the gas is, when you are 1/4 of a tank compared to when it's at half a tank. And that's the prevention line. In the community action setting, the outcome scale can be used to determine when to intervene. In general, if a person seeking assistance is below the prevention line, we want to give them a service or some type of intervention to help them. But if they're above the prevention line, we may be more hesitant or, wait or feel another person more dire need before that person if they're above the prevention line. The prevention line is considered to be the border between dependent and independent. There are no standard definitions for the 5 benchmarks. These benchmarks are defined operational by the outcomes or conditions that become associated with each benchmark. There are differences like the size of the tank and the rate of use, which may be defined by the creator of the scale. Community actions have the flexibility to set these benchmarks according to local conditions and characteristics of their population. In addition to placement or intake, the 5 benchmarks allow community actions to access, measure, movement of the customers along the self-sufficiency continuum over time. Okay. Turn to page 80. And we're going to be doing an activity. Think about all the various types of housing conditions in your community or in your community. Just jot down different type of housing situations. Okay, do everybody have at least one possible situation ready?
Sure.
All right. And you can just give me the first one, anybody.
Roach infested.
A housing situation.
You talking about like homes, 2 to 4 bedrooms,
Like
apartments?
homeowner, rental, subsidized, things like that.
I figured out like my girls' levels of housing.
Said section 8. Public housing. Different housing situations.
Well, rental.
Rental.
Ownership.
That's public housing.
They do. Rent to own.
Affordable housing.
Affordable housing. What about some situations that may be,
Shelters.
Okay.
Someone better just stay on people's couches for free.
Living with someone.
Group home.
Hotels. I have some that live in hotels.
Homeless. So we are going to develop an outcome scale with these housing situations that you guys just provided. you place a person who is on the Section 8 program or Section 8? Where would they fall? Stable?
I put them farm.
Public housing?
So
Stable.
that's depending on which public housing it is. But it would be safe.
Safe or stable?
Stable.
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 Okay.
Yeah, it would be safe,
What about rental? Safe?
Safe.
Yeah, again, it depends on where you are.
Homeowner?
Right.
Rent to own?
Same.
Affordable.
Affordable.
Rent to own. You say, affordable housing would be shelters. Living with someone.
Vulnerable.
And the motel or hotel would be vulnerable.
Hotel.
Well, no, they can't afford to pay for it, they just,
It's just like we,
You been in them hotel before, living?
just like we talked about the gas gauge, different
Got money.
circumstances will, you know, determine where you would place them. So in Macon County, we may place someone living in a hotel in crisis. But in Bristol County, you may place someone living in a hotel is vulnerable or safe.
Sometimes they're safe, yeah. Mine
Okay.
are.
Now, homeless.
in crisis.
Alright, so you guys just completed, development of a housing outcome scale. And you guys did a great job.
Thank you.
And keep in mind that once your agency develops a tool like this or something like this, it has to be standard for everyone who uses it at that agency. Alright, so we can move on to page 82. Analysis of the sample housing scale, which is coincide with page 83. Please note, this is one example of a housing scale. It is not to be considered the correct scale, as the descriptors contained in the benchmark should be based on local conditions, as we noted earlier. Everybody, in different areas, you may consider a different category or benchmark. If someone could read the first bullet under factors to consider.
The type of outcome scale you create for your community may be different from other communities. In all likelihood, it will take negotiators within the group who will identify the conditions or outcomes and where to associate them to the scale benchmarks. For example, public housing could be associated in any of the 5 scale benchmarks, depending on the location, quality of housing, conditions in the neighborhood, etc. Outcome statements are written to approximate actual conditions, and the placement of the conditions on the benchmarks must be accepted by all who use the scale.
All right. Thank you. Someone reads the next 2 bullets, please. I'll read. Some outcome scales include headers associated with each benchmark to help decide where to place the outcome, such as limited choice or dangerous. Next bullet.
Within a benchmark, when there is more than one outcome, you have 2 situations. Either the outcome can have the same value, such as in stable 6A, B, and C, or different values such as in crisis 2, 1A, 1B, and 0. Only one outcome is placed in each outcome benchmark unless assigned an individual favorable score. Numbers provide a shortcut to understanding placement on an outcome scale within the benchmarks.
There is a significant difference in outcomes placed in the vulnerable and safe benchmarks. Movement from vulnerable to stable is the transition from dependence to independence. In this model, a score of 5 or greater indicates placement above the prevention line. Outcomes above the prevention line are considered achievements of independence. Outcomes below the prevention line are considered conditions of dependence. I just want everybody to take a few minutes and look at the sample housing scale on 83, page 83, and kind of compare it to the one we just developed. And as we've mentioned or already discovered, some communities will place different states on different benchmarks depending on that community situation. Several qualities being addressed, such as affordability, choice, safety, level of performance, and support for subsidy. And also, this is a family level scale, as indicated by the check mark on top of the scale. Okay. Flip over to page 84. Establishing placement on the scale. It is important to establish a standardized procedure for placing a client on an outcome scale. Once the benchmark definitions are agreed upon, everyone who uses the scale must use the same definitions for each benchmark. It is difficult to accurately measure movement on a scale if the initial placement is faulty. You must have a reliable way to establish the baseline. And on the next page, that is like a checklist or assessment that you could go over with a client during intake, and by that assessment, that will tell you where they should be placed on the scale. And if that's something that is used in your agency as a standard tool, then everybody should be on the same page. Okay, we can go to page 86, using outcomes scales. In community action, outcome scales are used to measure incremental change between the scale benchmarks, which allow us to document the movement from conditions of dependency to increasing self-sufficiency. Outcome scales can be used to help visualize the big picture of the situation facing the client at the first meeting, measure change by comparing scale placement at 2 or more different times. If someone could read the next two.
Go ahead.
Determine how much progress and the time it takes an individual to reach the next scale benchmark. Capture incremental change, interim success, and progress towards long-term goals as interim goals are achieved.
Someone can read the next two bullets.
Identify areas where progress has not been made towards achieving long-term goals. Recognize any movement in a positive direction on the outcome scale as movement towards self-sufficiency, even if the movement is from in crisis to vulnerable.
And support development of case management plan where the client and worker establish mutual agreeable goals for movement towards self-sufficiency. And when they say where progress has not been made, that is also, we identify that as a neutral change. They did not move either up or down on the scale. Then we move over to page 87, measuring progress and reporting using an outcome scale. Consider the kind of evidence or documentation that will be used to verify client progress. It is the individual benchmark or outcomes on the outcome scale that are the reportable outcomes, not the labels thriving or in crisis. So when you're, giving the report, you wouldn't just say the client moved from in crisis to safe. You would say the client moved from being homeless to a rental apartment. In the housing example, you would not report that the person moved up. Oh, that's what this is. Okay. Many software and electronic data collection systems include scales, or these can be embedded. And we're actually going going to go to page 90, Introduction to Outcome Matrix. If someone could read the bold, where it says in the human condition.
In the human condition, we know well-being or achieving a level of self-sufficiency depends on the congruence of multiple factors that allow us to be functional on a daily basis.
In general, we accept the need for families to have a wage earner bringing in significant income to meet the expenses of the household. We accept that adult family members must have significant education and or skills to provide for good housing, food, transportation, child care if needed, discretional spending, etc. If we're thinking about an outcome scale, we would visualize these factors above the prevention line. At its simplest, an outcome matrix is a grouping of outcome scales arranged side by side. Page 90, characteristics of an outcome matrix. If someone could read the gray box, please. Page 91.
By using a common framework, outcome scales combined into an outcome matrix can be aggregated and provide a multidimensional look at the agency's work. Aggregation is important because it allows agencies to present data on a number of clients and programs in a uniform and quantifiable manner.
An outcome matrix is used to capture a client's progress across more than one program or service over time, capture data by the client across all agency programs, analyze data by both client and program, identify whether the client has strengths, which would be indicated above the prevention line, and whether clients need improvement, which would be indicated below the prevention line. Identify the relationship between different domains, provide background context, create a framework for reporting, adjust the agency resource allocation, and create a many needs assessment based on the experience of the client's population. All right, move to page 92. The outcome matrix presented on the next page, you will find 6 areas which an agency may use to define well-being of a family. All right, we're going to review this matrix. We're going to use our groups again for this. The first group is Earl Nim. If y'all could just look at the income and how it changed over time. Miss Pam, if y'all could look at employment. Miss Bonita, you could look at housing.